Wayfarer's Sanctuary, Book 1 of the Guild of the Eternal Flame series, written by Talia Beckett, narrated by Bryan Douglas. Chapter 1. The icy wind blasted Saria once more, blowing the breath she tried to warm her blue fingers with into the darkening evening air. She put foot after foot mechanically, as she had every moment since leaving Canton Peak 3 days earlier. Of course, when she had fled the small city for the safety of the isolated country, she had not taken into account the late winter in these parts. As a moon elf from the far warmer south, she had never had to endure temperatures like this. "Dumb squill," she said aloud, testing how the insult in the common tongue sounded in her voice. It came out far more pretentious than how it sounded coming from the man who'd yelled it at her only a few hours earlier as he hurried past in his horse-drawn cart. She'd thought it rich coming from a simple farmer, but of course, they didn't know who she was. That was the point. Out here, she could be who she wanted, even if that's a dumb squill, she thought to herself, breaking into a grin. The grin was still fixed on her face, half frozen there by the frigid blasts of air when she spotted the lights up ahead that let her know she had found Fentonia at last. Somehow finding more energy, she increased her pace, hurrying for the small farming town that would undoubtedly have some kind of inn or tavern to keep her warm through the night. "And don't forget food," she added aloud before wondering if she might be going insane. Never before had she talked to herself so much. Perhaps it was time she found some company. Someone not too chatty, but out here, there weren't that many elves. And the humans tolerated her, but didn't like to really talk about anything of meaning. Lost in her own thoughts, Saria tromped along the snowy road, passing stone-built houses and farms until she came to the center of the town and the inn that sat proudly at the head of the square. The flickering lights from its windows and around the door already making her feel warmer. As she came closer, she heard the sound of chattering voices, happy conversations, and the occasional outburst of laughter. It made her hesitate just a fraction of a second before heading inside. A few heads turned to look at her, but there was already a mix of travelers in the common room and loitering at the bar, so she didn't strike anyone as particularly different. Her eyes scanned over the mix, almost pleasantly surprised to spot a dwarf, a Dragon Born woman, and several other races among the more populous humans. None of them was drawing too much attention, giving her the boldness to pull down her hood and reveal her obvious features. Here, she didn't stand out as much. By the time she'd crossed the distance to the bar, and the portly woman stood behind it, she didn't feel anyone particularly looking at her anymore, and all the conversations had returned to normal. She waited as the dwarf, a follower from some kind of temple by the looks of his habit, paid for dinner and a room, giving her hope she could do the same. When he moved off, his transaction done, she stepped forward, but the woman opened her mouth before Saria could. "If you're wanting a room, I'm afraid you're out of luck, traveller." The woman's thick country accent made the words difficult to understand, but the gist was clear. "The snow's kept a lot of you here, and we've just not got the space for another. You might—"
"Oh my, I can't take the final room and let this whip of a girl be cast out into the cold,"
the dwarf said, cutting off the inn owner before she could finish explaining.
"Let her have my room. I'll head to the nearest temple and petition to sleep in their porch this evening. My goddess will bless my act of charity, no doubt, and keep me warm."
"I'm sure she will," another voice piped up as the Dragon-born woman came into view, her voice betraying her young age. If Saria was right, she could barely be considered an adult. She carried a warm sort of presence with her as she came closer. "Let me share my room. I don't mind having another wanderer for company. We can swap tales of our adventures." Saria paused, not sure how to respond to two such uncalled-for acts of kindness. One glance enough to see both of them were genuine. "I'd be honored to share." "Wonderful. That's settled then. Dwarf, no need for you to freeze those toes off on anyone's account. And no need for anyone to be turned away.
It's Thorgrim,
the dwarf replied, looking more than a little relieved despite the confidence he had put into his earlier offer.
Well, I guess you'll be wanting some dinner as well,
the innkeeper asked Saria, reinserting herself in the conversation. Saria nodded, hungrier than she'd been in a long time.
Make that another,
a loud male voice boomed from behind her.
And a room, if you'll please. And even if you'll not, I've got enough coin to back my request.
Saria looked over her shoulder and shuffled to the side to get out of the way of the burly man as he strode the last few steps to the bar, his boots thumping on the wooden floor. He slapped a gold coin down on the counter, but the woman just rolled her eyes.
There's no rooms left,
the Dragonborn girl said before anyone else could.
It's all right. I can share as well,
Thorgrim replied. Once again, the innkeeper rolled her eyes, and Saria had to stifle a chuckle at the turn of events.
Thank you, my good dwarf. Yerlin's my name, and sailing and adventuring is my game. Let me buy you a drink in return. A man could freeze his toes off in this weather.
As he said this, he gave Saria a large wink, making it clear he had heard everything they'd said before and had known there were no rooms. She stifled a gasp at the audacity of the man, but if Thorgrim was bothered by the advantage that had been taken of him, he didn't voice it, instead accepting one of the 2 large mugs of frothing ale that appeared on the counter.
Come over by the fire. I've got a table big enough for all 4 of us. And I do so love sitting by the fire on a night like this. Oh, and I'm Mira.
The Dragonborn walked away, her own delicate glass of drink clutched in one golden scaly hand, without looking back to see if they had accepted her invitation. One glance at the common room told Saria why. It was the only spare table in the entire building, and 4 chairs happened to sit around it. With a shrug, she took the small glass of wine she had requested and followed. She had just been suggesting to herself that some company might do her good, and there could be worse companions for an evening than 3 other travelers who were more likely to have stories of their own and wished to tell them than ask her about her own life. As soon as they were set, she noticed it would have looked odd to be by herself in such a social place. Only one person sat alone, a hooded figure sitting in the nearest corner at a small table, his eyes bright and watchful as he clutched some kind of steaming drink in a tankard. Their eyes met for a second before she looked back to her own companions, giving him the privacy he had evidently wanted.
See? Isn't the fire nice and warm? I love a good fire,
Mira said as she looked directly at the roaring blaze in the large fireplace. The firelight danced in her eyes, lighting up the grin on her face in a way that looked a little disconcerting. As quickly as the moment happened, it was gone, and the young woman turned to the table again.
Don't you love a good fire?
She asked, evidently trying to make conversation. Yarlin shrugged before taking a gulp of his ale.
It certainly aids in warming the limbs a little,
Thorgrim replied, evidently trying to be polite. Saria bit her lip, hoping the conversation wouldn't feel so difficult for long. It would be a long meal. Thankfully, the waitress turned up then with their food, laying out 4 bowls of steaming hot stew and a large loaf of bread for them to split. She carried a 5th on her tray, but looked around puzzled.
I could have sworn there was another of you adventure types. Fella in a hood,
the confused woman said.
Over there,
Saria replied, speaking for the first time since she'd sat, and motioning towards the hooded man alone in the corner. As soon as the waitress looked in that direction, she noticed him, her eyes widening in surprise. Once more, he looked at the moon elf, this time giving her a small nod of acknowledgement, but her companions brought her attention back to the food they were already gobbling up, offering her a share of the bread they'd already ripped into 4. Ravenous, she joined them in filling their stomachs until every morsel was gone.
So, what brings you all to Fantonia?
Mira asked the second she had finished eating, unabashed by the less than warm responses to conversation so far.
Coin,
Yarlin said, very matter-of-factly.
Coin? You just want money?
Mira raised her eyebrows.
How else can I buy more ale?
Yarlin lifted his mug a few inches. Not to mention good food and a roof over my head. Then there's the fact that having some gold to throw around goes down well with the women. Saria found her own expression turning to one of surprise as he winked at her again while speaking the last few words. His boldness took her by surprise, especially given their having only just met. Humans were meant to be quicker to launch into these things than elves, however. The dwarf shook his head. A grin on his face showing the implied disgust was more playful.
Don't pay him any mind, my dear,
Thorgrim said, looking at her for a moment.
He's the kind of man who's old talk but harmless enough.
If a lady is willing, then so am I, Yarlin replied, seemingly unoffended by the dwarf's remark despite refuting it.
I'm not sure a lady would be the type to be willing so readily.
Well, that we can agree on, Yarlin laughed, raising his mug in a sort of salute before chugging another large portion of the contents. Mira shook her head as she chuckled along with the others, evidently used to their sort of banter. Before the conversation could continue, the door was slammed open, and a man dressed in a warm jacket, a feathered hat, and large rubber boots, what passed for farmers' winter gear in this sort of region, strode in.
I told you, Stan, I burnin' told you.
His voice was so loud and aggressive it carried throughout the building and created an almost instant hush among the patrons. The portly woman behind the bar had been replaced by a man, evidently the Stan being addressed, who walked to this end, never stopping the motion of his hand as it ran a cloth around the top of a mug, cleaning it off.
The supplies have only gone and got themselves stuck out there in the snow, or worse.
Stan nodded, but didn't interrupt the tirade, filling the mug before passing it over.
This winter has really had it in for us, I tell you, Stan. I don't know if we'll be able to keep going much longer. I don't get those supplies. I might as well give up now and move the family back to Canton Peak.
No, there's a chance they're just delayed.
They were meant to be here this morning, Stan, this morning! Perhaps we can help,
Thorgrim said, getting up and wandering over.
Go check the road where it's meant to be, and escort it the rest of the way here.
Mira leapt up, a grin spreading across her face as she followed the dwarf over to the bar. They had the farmer's attention, but Yarlin was the next to react. He downed the last of his ale, mumbled something that sounded like it included the word coin, and also rose. Not wanting to be left behind, Saria stood up and slowly joined the other three. For a second, they were merely looked over, but the farmer nodded.
Well, I don't deny I'd be grateful for the assistance. I'd send my boy, but he busted his leg in a nasty fall a few days back. Clumsy oaf. Said someone put a brick in his way. But he's never very observant at the best of times. I can't go and leave old Nell on her own when she's about ready to drop with child. If you can get those supplies up to the farm for me, I can make sure your stay here till the snow thaws enough is covered. Keep the drink flowing nicely, too.
Aye, if you can help get that wagon in, I'd be grateful, too,
the innkeeper Stan added.
There's things in that load we all need, and no doubt if we lose a farm we'd all suffer come next winter. I'm sure we could chuck a few extra coin into the bargain to boot, if you can bring those goods all in safely.
This seemed to be enough to mollify Yarlin. He slapped the farmer on the shoulder. We'll do our best. Where do you need us to go? There's a route out of town east. It bridges the mountain pass between us and Felon City. It's still covered in snow, but the men promised they could get through all right. Saria was distracted from the farmer's explanation by the swish of a travel cloak behind her and to the left. A moment later, she caught sight of the hooded man as he came up beside her. She glanced his way, catching his eye and seeing a small smile on his face. But he looked away, bringing both their attentions back to the speaking man. The road is kept open by the constant traveling, and the men stationed at 3 small keeps along the route. We got word the wagon passed the final keep the day before yesterday. It should have arrived today. I know the road well. I've traveled it many times this winter. Perhaps I could guide this little party of adventurers along it. I'm sure we can bring your supplies safely home." Yarlin looked him up and down, acting like he'd only just noticed the hooded man before shrugging.
"Wonderful, wonderful,"
the farmer said, almost deciding for the party.
"I'm Thorgrim,"
the dwarf said, tapping his forehead. The tall man nodded. "Andorn, at your service." Saria frowned, picking up a faint trace of deception, but unsure why. After acknowledging the others, however, Andorn turned to her. "I see we'll have a keen-eyed ranger to accompany us. My mother was an elf, and I have a great respect for her people. I'm sure your company shall be very advantageous to the party." The words explained the deception. He'd given a human name, but no doubt carried an elven one as well. Although she was curious to learn it, she knew she carried secrets of her own, and now wasn't the time to reveal or ask for any. As if reading her mind, he ushered the group out of the door. "The sooner we get started and find our missing wagon, the sooner we can return to warm beds and even warmer appreciation." Once again, the hooded man winked at her, a smile barely appearing on his face before it was gone again. "Well," she thought, "I found some company, and it seems a quest."